My parents drained my college fund to save my brother's failed business, called it family loyalty, and expected me to stay silent. Until I consulted a lawyer, discovered the trust documents, froze access legally, and walked away without funding their next financial emergency. The account is empty. Those 3 words hit me like a physical thing, not a metaphor. Like something actually struck me in the chest and knocked the air straight out of my lungs. I was sitting in the financial aid office of the university I'd worked 4 years of high school to get into. The advisor across the desk, a quiet woman named Mrs. Calloway, had her eyes pointed at her screen, not at me. Like she already knew this conversation was going to go sideways, and she didn't want to be the one looking at my face when it did. The linked account your family submitted shows a 0 balance, she said again. Quieter this time. Like saying it softer would somehow make it land easier. It didn't. Hey viewers, before we move on to the video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want to see more stories like this. I'm 22. I was set to start my junior year of college that fall. My parents had always told me the college fund was untouchable. That was the word my dad used, untouchable. He said it the way people say things they think are permanent. The way you say the sun rises in the east. The way you say water is wet. That money is untouchable, he'd told me when I was 17, sitting at the kitchen table after my older brother Derek had just wrecked his first car. That's yours. No matter what happens in this family, that money doesn't move. I held on to that. For years, I held on to that. I thanked Mrs. Calloway, stood up from that chair, walked out of the financial aid office, and sat down on a bench outside the building. The kind of bench where students usually eat lunch or scroll their phones. I sat there for 45 minutes and didn't move. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry yet. I was just trying to understand what had happened to reality. Because something had clearly broken. Some fundamental agreement between me and the universe had been quietly torn up and nobody had thought to mention it. I called my mom first. Not because I expected honesty from her, but because she tends to panic and say too much. She answered on the second ring. Hey, honey, how'd the registration go? Her voice was warm, casual. The voice of someone who hadn't just detonated a bomb in the center of my future. Mom, I said, the account is empty. Silence. Not the kind of silence that means confusion. The kind that means someone is quickly sorting through a filing cabinet in their head, looking for the right response. Can you come home this weekend? She finally said. We can explain everything in person. Explain what, Mom? Just come home. She hung up before I could say anything else. I drove home that Friday. For hours. I had 4 hours of highway and radio static to mentally prepare myself for whatever was waiting on the other side of that front door. Part of me genuinely thought there'd been a banking error. Part of me thought maybe there was a second account I didn't know about, and someone had just accidentally submitted the wrong one to the university. Part of me was already constructing a world where this was all a misunderstanding. I needed that world to be real, because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to look at directly. My parents were both home when I arrived. My dad, Frank, was sitting in the living room with a coffee mug in his hands and the expression of a man who has rehearsed his lines but is still not confident in his delivery. My mom, Wendy, was in the kitchen doing that thing she does when she's nervous, wiping down counter surfaces that are already clean. Derek wasn't there. I noticed that immediately. Derek, 2 years older than me, currently the owner of a craft brewery and taproom that had been, by all accounts, slowly bleeding out for the past 18 months, was conspicuously absent. And I thought, of course he is. Of course he's not here for this. Sit down, my dad said, not unkindly, but with the gravity of someone who knows the conversation they're about to have is not a small one. I sat. Before we start, I said, I just want to know if the money is gone. My dad looked at his coffee mug. Yes, he said. One syllable. Simple. Final. And whatever hope I'd been carrying in my chest for the past 4 days quietly folded up and left the room. What followed was 45 minutes of the most carefully worded, emotionally manipulative explanation I have ever sat through in my life. And I want to be clear, I don't think my parents are evil people. I think they're people who made a decision that was catastrophically unfair and then built an elaborate emotional architecture around it to avoid feeling the weight of what they'd done. My dad started with the backstory. Derek's brewery had opened 2 years earlier with a lot of fanfare and a lot of family excitement. My parents had already invested $30,000 of their own savings into it at the start. My dad had called it a family venture. My mom had posted photos of the grand opening on Facebook. Everyone had been proud. But craft breweries are brutal businesses. The margins are thin, the competition is fierce, and Derek, who is charming, creative, and genuinely passionate about beer, is not, as it turns out, particularly gifted at managing inventory, controlling labor costs, or preventing a bar manager from slowly skimming cash for 6 months before anyone noticed. By last spring, the brewery was $112,000 in debt. My dad laid out the number like he was presenting evidence. Like the sheer size of it explained everything. He would have lost everything, my dad said. His home, his investment, his business, everything. Derek took out a second mortgage, my mom added from the kitchen doorway, wringing a dish towel. He could have lost the house. I sat with that for a moment. How much did you take from my account? I asked. Another pause. 86,000, my dad said. And my vision went briefly white at the edges. $86,000. That fund had been built over my entire life. Contributions from grandparents, birthday money redirected, a chunk of my grandfather's estate when he passed. Years of compound interest, decades of intention, gone to pay down debt on a brewery that, as far as I knew, was still struggling. When did you do this? I asked. 8 months ago, my dad said. 8 months. I'd been at school. I'd been going to class, studying, making plans for my junior year. While 8 months ago, on some ordinary Tuesday, my parents had sat down and made the decision to take the floor out from under my future. And then said nothing. You didn't tell me, I said. Not accusatory yet. Just stating the fact out loud because I needed to hear it in the room. We were going to, my mom started. When? I asked. Silence. We thought Derek would be able to pay it back, my dad said. We gave him a timeline. And he's still working on stabilizing the business. I stared at my father. This man who had looked me in the eye when I was 17 and said the word untouchable. So the plan was to take my money, give it to Derek, hope he paid it back before I needed it. And if he didn't, what? Just tell me when I showed up at the financial aid office. My dad set his coffee mug down. It wasn't like that. Tell me what it was like, Dad. What followed was the part one hadn't fully prepared for. My dad shifted. Not in his chair, in his approach. He stopped being apologetic and started being principled. Which, if you've ever been on the receiving end of this particular move, you know it is somehow much worse. Family takes care of family, he said. That's how we raised you. And there it was. The pivot. The reframe. We didn't steal from you. We exercised family loyalty. Derek needed help. My mom said, stepping fully into the room now. We didn't have enough liquid to cover it ourselves after the initial investment. Your account was the only option, my dad said. You could get loans, he added. Students get loans all the time. And I want you to notice something about that sentence. Students get loans all the time. Not, we're so sorry we put you in this position. Not, we'll do everything we can to make this right. Just, other people do this, so it's fine. You access my account, I said slowly. Without telling me. We have access, my dad said. We've always had access. We set it up. When I was a minor, I said. Yes. I'm 22, Dad. The account structure never changed. And that was the moment I felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly. Something colder. More focused. Because what my dad had just told me, whether he realized it or not, was that the reason they hadn't updated the account structure, the reason I'd never been prompted to take sole ownership when I turned 18, might not have been an oversight. I drove back to school on Sunday. I didn't yell. I didn't cry in front of them. I told them I needed time to think, which was true. My mom hugged me at the door and said she hoped I understood. My dad shook my hand. Actually shook my hand, like we'd concluded a business meeting, and told me that family comes first. I nodded. I got in my car, and I started thinking. My roommate that year was a guy named Trent, whose uncle happened to be a financial attorney. Not the exact specialty I needed, but close enough that when I laid out the situation over dinner that Sunday night, Trent didn't blink. He just said, "You need to talk to someone before you do anything else." I know, I said. No, he said, looking at me directly. I mean before you call them back. Before you respond to any texts. Before you agree to anything. Discuss a repayment plan. Or say the words, "It's okay." You need to talk to someone first. That was the smartest thing anyone said to me that entire month. I found an attorney named Mr. Callister through a referral service connected to the university. He specialized in estate and trust law, which turned out to be exactly what I needed. I explained the situation. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he asked me 3 questions. First, do you know the original structure of the account? Was it a custodial account, a trust, a 529, a UTMA? I said I wasn't entirely sure. Second, do you have any documents related to the account, statements, the original setup paperwork, anything your parents might have sent you or that came with your grandfather's estate? I said I had some things in a folder at home. Third, when you turned 18, do you ever remember signing anything related to the account? I thought about it. I said no. He nodded slowly. Okay, he said. Let's find out exactly what you're dealing with. My grandfather, my mom's father, had passed when I was 16. He'd been a careful, deliberate man who did not trust people with money, including his own children. He'd left a specific instruction in his will that a portion of his estate, roughly $40,000, be placed in a dedicated educational trust for me. Not a general account, not a gift, a trust, with conditions. I had always vaguely known this, the way teenagers know things adults tell them, half absorbed, filed away, not really examined. I hadn't thought about the word trust in years. Mr. Callister had me request a full copy of my grandfather's estate documents from the county probate records office. It took 9 days to arrive. Those 9 days were some of the longest of my life. My parents called 3 times during that window. My mom twice, my dad once. On the first call, my mom wanted to know if I'd thought about applying for additional student loans. She framed this with warmth, like she was offering a solution. On the second call, she mentioned that Derek was really trying, that the brewery had a strong weekend, that things were looking up. I listened. I said very little. On my dad's call, he asked if we were okay. I said we were fine. I said I was just busy with school. He said he was glad. He told me he loved me. And I said it back, because I meant it, and because love and accountability are not the same thing, and you can feel one while still pursuing the other. The documents arrived on a Thursday afternoon. I drove straight to Mr. Callister's office. We went through them together, and what we found was this. My grandfather had not set up a simple custodial account. He had established an actual educational trust. It had a named trustee, my mother, and a named beneficiary, me. It had a specific disbursement condition. Funds were to be used exclusively for the beneficiary's post-secondary education expenses, including tuition, fees, housing, and books. And it had a clause my grandfather had apparently insisted on, because he was thorough and because he had spent enough years watching family money disappear into bad decisions. The clause stated that any disbursement for non-educational purposes required written consent from the beneficiary once they reached the age of majority. Written consent. From me, which I had never given. I sat in Mr. Callister's office for a long time after he read that clause out loud. He gave me space to process it. Then he said, carefully, if the withdrawal was made without your written consent and the funds were used for purposes outside the defined scope of the trust, your mother may have breached her fiduciary duty as trustee. What does that mean in practice? I asked. In practice, he said, it means you may have legal remedies. It means the withdrawal may not have been legally valid. And it means if you want to, there are steps you can take to protect the remaining structure of the trust and potentially pursue recovery of the funds that were improperly disbursed. I asked him what steps those would be. He told me. We started with a cease and desist letter. Not aggressive, not inflammatory. A formal legal notice sent to my mother as the named trustee, advising her that a review of the trust documents had identified a potentially improper disbursement, and requesting that no further withdrawals be made pending legal review. We also filed a request with the financial institution to flag the account and require dual authorization, meaning my written approval, for any future transactions. This did not recover the $86,000. Not immediately, but it did one crucial thing. It stopped the bleeding. Because here's something Mr. Callister told me that I hadn't considered. The trust still had money in it. The original balance had been higher than $86,000. There was still roughly $19,000 remaining. And without this step, there was nothing to prevent that from disappearing too. My mom called me the afternoon the letter arrived. I knew it was coming. I let it ring twice, took a breath, and answered. What is this? She said. Not angry. Scared. The voice of someone who has just realized the situation is larger than they thought. It's a legal notice, I said. I know what it is, she said. Why did you? Were your parents? You sent lawyers after your own parents. I sent a notice to the trustee of a trust that was improperly accessed. I said. I'd practiced that sentence. I said it as quietly as I could. Your grandfather's money was meant to help this family, she said. It was meant for my education, I said. You and Derek are family. I know that. So how could you do this? And I want to pause here, Because this question, how could you do this, is one of the most effective tools in a certain kind of argument. Because it repositions the wronged party as the aggressor. It takes the person who was harmed, who sought recourse, who followed proper channels, and makes them the one who needs to justify their behavior. I had thought about how I would handle this question. Mom, I said, how could you take $86,000 from my account without telling me, and then wait 8 months while I went to school and made plans and thought everything was fine, and then expect me to find out at the financial aid office? Silence. How could you do that? I said, not cruelly, just returning the question to where it belonged. She cried. I stayed on the line. I didn't tell her it was okay, because it wasn't. When she was done, she said, your father wants to talk to you. I said I'd call him tomorrow. I didn't call him until 3 days later. My dad, to his credit, did not try the emotional pivot again. He was more direct. He said the letter had scared them. He said he didn't realize the trust had specific legal conditions. He said he thought it was just an account. I believed him, actually. I don't think my dad is a dishonest man by nature. I think he's someone who wanted to help one child without thinking hard enough about what he was doing to the other one. And I think when it's your own kid's money, it's easy to talk yourself into a lot of things. We'll pay it back, he said. How? I asked. A long pause. We'll figure it out. Dad, I said, the brewery is still in debt. You already put $30,000 of your own money into it. Where is the payback money coming from? He didn't have an answer. And I think, maybe for the first time since they'd made the withdrawal, he was actually sitting inside the full reality of what they'd done. Derek called me 2 days after that. I had been wondering when he would. I'll be honest, this was the call I was least prepared for. Because Derek and I, for most of our lives, had been close. Not best friend close, but brother close. The kind of close where you don't have to talk every week to feel like the relationship is real. He called, and he didn't start with an apology. He started with, I didn't ask them to do it. I know, I said. I never would have, he said. I know, Derek. I found out after, he said. When? A pause. 6 months ago. I closed my eyes. You've known for 6 months. Yeah. Did you tell them to tell me? I told them they had to, and they didn't. No, he said. They didn't. I don't know what I expected Derek to do differently. He's not my parents. He couldn't force them. But sitting with the knowledge that he'd known for 6 months, that my own brother had been carrying this information while I was going about my life at school, not knowing, that was its own kind of hurt. I'm sorry, he said. I know, I said. Because I believe that too. What are you going to do, he asked. I'm protecting what's left, I said. And I'm figuring out the rest. Are you going to sue them? I thought about that for a moment. I don't know yet, I said. I hope not, he said. Me too, I said. And I meant it. Here's the thing about pursuing legal remedies against your own parents that nobody tells you. It's not cinematic. It's not satisfying. It doesn't feel like justice being served in a clean, visible way. It feels like sitting in a quiet office going through documents and trying to keep your hands steady. It feels like answering emails from an attorney while your friends are at happy hour. It feels like calling your grandmother, my grandfather's widow, who was still alive at 81 and still sharp, and trying to explain what happened to the money her husband had set aside, specifically for you. That conversation was the hardest one of all. My grandmother's name was short for Dorothy. She'd been married to my grandfather for 53 years before he passed. She lived in a small house about 2 hours from my university, and when I called her, she already knew something was wrong because I never called on a Wednesday afternoon. I told her everything, as carefully and as completely as I could. She didn't say anything for a long time when I finished. Then she said, he put that clause in there because he knew. Knew what? I asked. He knew your mother struggles to separate her children, she said. He loved her for it mostly, but he knew it meant she'd give and give until there was nothing left. He didn't want her to give what wasn't hers to give. I didn't know what to say to that. He would be furious, she said, and then he'd tell you to do exactly what you're doing. You think so? He'd say protect yourself first. Family will call it selfish. He'd say let them. The legal process moved slowly, and I want to be honest about what the outcome actually looked like, because I think in stories like this people sometimes expect a dramatic courtroom moment or a satisfying check in the mail. That's not what happened. What happened was this. Mr. Callister sent a formal demand letter to my mother as trustee, documenting the improper disbursement and requesting a repayment plan. The letter outlined the legal exposure she faced as trustee, which was real, not theoretical. Breach of fiduciary duty on a trust is not a trivial thing. It can result in personal liability. My parents consulted their own attorney. Their attorney apparently told them the situation was serious. 3 weeks after the demand letter, my parents called me together, a joint call, and proposed a formal repayment agreement. They would repay the $86,000 over 7 years through a structured payment plan, secured by a lien on their property. Mr. Callister reviewed the terms. He suggested modifications. My parents accepted the modifications. We signed paperwork. The $19,000 remaining in the trust was transferred into an account in my name only, which I used to cover my remaining tuition. The payment plan was notarized and filed. I want to be clear about what that agreement meant and didn't mean. It didn't mean the money was back. Not immediately. It meant there was a legal mechanism for recovery. It meant I had documentation. It meant if payments stopped, I had recourse. It wasn't perfect, but it was something I hadn't had before, and it was more than my parents had offered voluntarily. The family dynamics after all of this were exactly as complicated as you'd imagine. My mom went through a period of about 2 months where she communicated with me primarily through my grandmother, who served as a kind of reluctant intermediary. My dad sent me a long email that was part apology and part explanation and part defense, and I read it twice and responded with 4 sentences thanking him for writing it and saying I needed more time. Derek and I talked more often than we had in years. Not about the money necessarily, just talked. The way brothers do when something has shaken the furniture of the whole house and you're both trying to figure out what's still standing. There was one moment I need to tell you about. About 2 months after the agreement was signed, my uncle, my dad's brother, a man named Vernon who I've always respected, called me. Not to take sides, to ask how I was doing. We talked for a long time. At some point he said, "You know your parents think they were doing the right thing." "I know that," I said. "I'm not sure they understand why that doesn't change anything." "Because the road to hell," he started. "It's not even about that," I said. "It's that they made a decision about my life. A life-altering decision about my financial future. And they didn't include me. I was 21 years old. Not a child. Not someone who needed to be protected from the information. They just decided. And then waited. And hoped I wouldn't find out until it was too late to matter." Vernon was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I can't argue with that. Here's what the whole experience taught me about something I'd never had to think about before. The difference between love and respect. My parents love me. I have never seriously doubted that. But love without respect, love that positions itself as the reason for every decision, including the ones that harm you, is not enough. You can love someone and still treat them like a prop in your own story. You can love someone and still make massive choices about their life without considering that they are a person with their own agency, their own plans, their own future that belongs to them and not to the family unit. My parents loved both me and Derek. And in their mind, loving Derek meant saving Derek. And saving Derek meant using what was available. And what was available happened to be mine. And love was the word they used to make that feel okay. I took a gap semester. The tuition had been partially covered by the remaining trust funds and a scholarship I'd applied for after everything happened. A small one. Not enough to cover everything, but something. I picked up extra work. I restructured my plan. I graduated a semester later than I'd expected. This is the part that doesn't make it into the clean versions of stories like this. There was a cost. A real one. Not just financial. My plans shifted. A graduate program I'd been tracking had a specific application window I missed because I was managing legal paperwork and working extra hours and trying to hold my life together. I'll apply again. I might get in, but I'll never know what would have happened if none of this had. Derek's brewery closed 14 months after all of this. I'm not going to say I saw it coming, because I don't know that I did. But I'm also not going to pretend it was a total surprise. The $86,000 bought him time. Not stability. He lost the business, but not the house. The second mortgage was restructured, and he managed to hold on to it. He's working for another company now. He told me recently it's the least stressed he's been in years. I believe him, and I don't hold the brewery against him. I hold it against the idea that it was worth what it cost. My parents made their first payment on the repayment plan 3 months after we signed. They've made every payment since. I check the account when it arrives. I don't call to thank them. This is not cruelty. It's just, what they're doing is honoring a legal obligation, not performing an act of generosity. And I've gotten very clear, over the past year, about the difference between those two things. About 8 months after the legal agreement was signed, my mom asked me to help them with something. She called it a family emergency. I felt my whole body go still. She said my dad's car had broken down, and they were short on cash that month because the repayment plan combined with their other expenses had stretched things thin. And could I? No, I said. Not meanly. Not dramatically. Just, no, I don't have it, I said. Which was mostly true. I was still rebuilding. But even if I'd had it, I want to be honest with you about this. I'm not sure I would have given it. Not because I wanted them to struggle, but because somewhere in the past year and a half, I had watched what happens when I am positioned as a resource in someone else's financial emergency. And I had decided, quietly and without announcement, that I would not be that again. She was hurt. I could hear it. She said she understood. And maybe she did. Or maybe she understood the surface of it and not the thing underneath, which is that I had changed. Not bitterly. Not permanently closed. But differently. The version of me that would have said yes without thinking, that version was gone. And I wasn't mourning him. I want to say something about the word loyalty, because my dad used it that first conversation and I've been turning it over ever since. He said taking that money was family loyalty. And I've thought about what loyalty actually is and what it isn't. Loyalty is not silence. Loyalty is not compliance. Loyalty is not the willingness to absorb harm without complaint so that someone else's crisis stays manageable. That's not loyalty. That's just being convenient. Real loyalty, the kind worth having, includes honesty. It includes saying, I need help, and I want you to know what it's going to cost. It includes treating the person you're asking as someone whose consent matters. My parents bypassed all of that and called the bypass loyalty. I've had to sit with the fact that for them, those two words, loyalty and silence, might actually be synonymous. And I've had to decide that for me, they're not. My relationship with my parents now is functional, careful, not warm in the way it used to be, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. There are phone calls. There are holidays, most of them. There are moments, sometimes, where it almost feels like before. And then one of us will say something that brushes the edge of it, some reference to finances, to Derek, to plans for the future, and the whole thing goes slightly formal again, like a scar that looks like skin until you press on it. My grandmother called me on my birthday last year. She asked if I was okay. I said I was doing well. She said, "You sound different." Different how? I asked. Steadier, she said. I thought about that. I think I am, I said. Good, she said. That's what he would have wanted. Not the money, the steadiness. I've thought a lot about what I would tell someone else in the same situation. Not a list. Not 5 steps. Just this. The moment you realize the people who are supposed to protect your future have compromised it, your first instinct is going to be to manage their feelings, to soften the confrontation, to give them the benefit of the doubt in ways that actually put you at further risk. You're going to want to be reasonable so badly that you'll be tempted to call unreasonable things reasonable. Don't. Get information. Get documents. Get professional advice before you have any conversation that could be used as implied consent. Because here's the thing nobody tells you. Being quiet is not neutral. Being quiet gets read as acceptance. And acceptance is very hard to walk back once it's been assumed. I'm not angry anymore. I want to be honest about that, because I know that in stories like this, the anger is supposed to sustain the narrative. But the truth is, the anger ran its course. What replaced it was something harder to name. A kind of clarity. The clarity of a person who now knows exactly where the edges of certain relationships are. Who has tested the floor in specific rooms and found out which parts hold weight and which parts don't. That's not a sad thing, necessarily. Sad would be not knowing. Sad would be standing on the soft parts without realizing it, right up until you fall through. At least now I know. At least now I know. There's one more thing I need to say, and I'll say it plainly. My parents were not malicious. I've said that before, and I mean it every time. But here's the other side of that. The absence of malice does not equal the absence of harm. The road being paved with good intentions doesn't change what the road leads to. My parents made a choice. They chose Derek's immediate crisis over my long-term security. They chose to protect him from the consequences of a failing business and to redistribute those consequences onto me, silently, without consent, and with the assumption that my love for the family would prevent me from fighting back. They almost got that last part right. Almost. The trust is still technically active. The payments come in on schedule. Mr. Callister checks in with me twice a year. The account is in my name. No one else has access. I check it the same way I check my front door lock. Not anxiously, just deliberately. Just making sure. My grandfather built that clause into the trust because he understood something about human nature that I had to learn the hard way. He understood that love is not a guarantee of fairness. He understood that the people closest to you are exactly the people most capable of deciding, on your behalf, what you need and what you don't. He tried to protect me from the inside of that dynamic. From the place where a parent looks at a child's resources and sees something that can be moved around on a board like a piece in a game they're playing for someone else. He tried. And when the protection wasn't enough on its own, I had to finish the job. I had to become the person who checked the documents and made the calls and signed the papers and said no to the next emergency. I had to become the person my grandfather built the claws for. I don't know if that's a happy ending or just an ending. I don't know if things with my parents will ever fully reset to something that feels like it used to. Some bridges, when you cross them in a certain direction, look different on the way back. Some trusts, and I mean that in both senses of the word, don't fully rebuild. What I do know is this. I have a future. It's delayed. It's shaped differently than I planned. It was purchased at a cost I didn't choose and shouldn't have had to pay. But it's mine. And no one, regardless of how much they love me, is touching it again without my knowledge, my consent, and my signature on the line. That's not bitterness. That's just the person I became. And I've decided to be okay with him.